Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. I am trying very hard to contain my excitement this episode. Brian K. Vaughan is one of my favorite comic book writers, and I was thrilled he agreed to come on the show. He was so gracious to spend over an hour talking comics, writing, and collaboration with me. I am so grateful to share these thoughtful conversations with humans that I admire so greatly. Brian was kind enough to entertain all of my questions about his childhood, inspiration behind his stories, and his favorite books and shows. For those that don't already know, Brian K. Vaughan is an award-winning writer and co-creator of acclaimed comic book series including Saga, Paper Girls, Y the Last Man, Runaways, and The Private Eye. He sometimes writes for film and television in Los Angeles, where he lives with his family and their dogs, Hamburger and Milkshake. Spoiler alert for those that have not read issues 1 through 54 of Saga or Y the Last Man. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, you can become a patron of the show like one of my newest supporters, Kimberly Naylor. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. If you'd like a shout out like Kimberly, you can go to my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Brian. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today.
It is a terrific honor. I'm happy to finally be here with you.
Yes, I have to admit to our listeners and the audience that I need to publicly thank you for allowing me to stalk you for the past 3 to 4 years as I've aggressively reached out to you and had mutual friends contact on my behalf. And you were so kind to sit down and have a conversation. So I'm so thrilled to be talking to you. And I hope I don't fangirl out too hard and embarrass myself.
Not at all. It is a real pleasure. And I mentioned I'm friends with Greg Rucka, who speaks so highly of you. And just everyone loves you. So it's an honor. So I'm sorry it's just taken so long, but I've been a real hermit for the last 4 years. So it's nice to come out of hiding.
You have a few things on your plate, and of course I keep up with them. And we are going to talk about all the wonderful things you're doing, especially the most recent work, which is in our inbox, ever so frequently in Spectators. And before we jump into all of that, I'm going to jump right in and just tell you that huge fan, obviously, and your comics have just really made such an impression on me. I was never a really big comic book geek growing up. My husband got me into it from my insomnia, and Y the Last Man didn't help with my insomnia. It kept me up, actually, and it was the first full series that I ever read twice in a row right away. I stopped and I'm like, I need to read this again right now. And I was never a very good reader. So you've helped me on my journey of reading, but also just so inspiring, and it's made such an impact on me. So thank you for that.
Holy cow. It's extremely kind. Thank you.
And I will stop fangirling and just let you know, myself as well as others, I'm in book clubs and we talk all the time about your books, and your characters, you just have a way of making us hate them and then making us love them, and then you kill them. And so my thought is do you just sit home at night and go, now I will torture all of my loyal readers and just kill everyone off that they love? And I've already done a spoiler at the beginning of this. People will know we're going to talk about Saga. We're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about all the wonderful things you do. And anyone who reads your work pretty much knows that you slay us with your with your characters. Do you kind of start off knowing right away this character's a goner, and what is your process of creating these people these characters that we just fall in love with, and then you ultimately crush our souls?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I guess I do. I try to know a character's beginning, and I like to go into a story knowing where it's going to end. I don't always know how they're going to get there, and I'm always, of course, open to it changing over the course of the story. But I do like knowing. But it is fascinating and kind of you to say that there are characters you go from hating to loving. I guess I always start every story. I love everyone. I love everyone there. There are no villains there, because I guess I just see a little bit of myself in each of them. So it's always interesting to see which characters readers respond to and which ones they really despise. But I guess I do, maybe I'm a contrarian, but when I get the sense, oh, the audience really hates this person, I'm like, you'll see about that. You'll come to love Prince Robot in time.
That's who's on my mind, right? When it's like, because at first you're like, oh, he's terrible. And then naturally, you kill him and then I'm like crying, So yeah, I love that you just said that you see a little bit of yourself in each of them. And before I asked that question, you said that, you kind of know where they're going. Does it hurt you as much as it hurts us when they leave the story and they die?
Usually not until I see the artwork. I'm a pretty cruel overlord of this universe. I just move my little chess pieces around. I'm like, oh, hooray, it's their death issue. It's coming. But yeah, it's not until, particularly with Saga, that the pages come back and Fiona just pours her heart and soul into it. And then I see what I have wrought, what terrible things I've done to these beautiful characters. And yes, I'm filled with self-loathing, and I hate myself as much as the audience hopefully hates me for it. But I'm pretty cool and removed, I like to think, until the art comes in.
Okay. Well, it makes me feel a little bit better knowing that it does affect you in the same way. But which character in particular do you feel like you see yourself reflected in the most? Because they're all so variant for you to say that there's like a bit of you in each of them. Is there one that you kind of identify with the most?
No, definitely not. There's no surrogate Brian character. There's no mouthpiece for me. I find it really boring to use characters as just a vehicle to get my own feelings out into the world. So they're all so different from me. But, so are my children. They are so wildly different from my wife and me. And yet I recognize small parts of myself in each of them. But I don't take too much credit or responsibility for it. It just feels like characters and children can't help but have a little bit of you in them. But no, I love them all equally. There's really no one character who is more me than anyone else.
I see. I love the analogy of they're kind of like these characters are your children, right? You basically have to birth them, which is quite a process, and take them through, and then bring them to life, and you take them on this journey. And I know that you had mentioned several times that Saga is influenced by Star Wars and Parenthood, and I believe that there's just like a lot of parallel into maybe the magic of why Saga has been such a huge impact for so many people, and why people just immediately take into it. One, people love Star Wars stuff, of course, but two, you really do capture that parenthood. And I feel like maybe it's the time that you have been writing it is the reason, like why you are capturing. Maybe you had the sleepless nights at the same time and all of that. Like, can you share a little bit, just a bit about that process?
Sure, 100%. Saga has been. My daughter in particular has been growing up at almost exactly the same age as Hazel. Yeah. And so it has been such a gift to be able to exploit and steal from my children that everything they're going through. I'm like, oh, we're trying to find a school for them. We're trying to find a physician for them. I realize when I try to talk about parenthood with my friends who are happily child-free, I'm just describing the drama and excitement, and I watch their eyes glaze over, and it is so boring from the outside, and it is so thrilling and cool from the inside. So I was like, how can I translate how it feels to create something? And so, yeah, using this sort of sci-fi fantasy universe felt like a way to be able to discuss the act of creation in a way that's hopefully not excruciatingly boring.
I would say no, as would every other reader and award and everything like that. We'll get to that later. But I was fascinated. Like, one of the things I really love is rereads. I will admit that I like to kind of wait a bit before I do the reread because then I feel like I'm doing the reread a lot of times. But I love actually the to be continued or the back matter of the comics because I feel like it's just like a window to getting to know you a lot better. And I during this reread and then of course preparation for this for the last 4 years, I love that you talk about your writing environment because as you know, I have a lot of wonderful creators on the show and I love to kind of pick their brain about what that's like because it's so different for everyone. Some people are able to like listen to music and a lot of people go into the bunker like yourself and it's fascinating. There's no Wi-Fi, no phone, no TVs. I think you only have one Twin Peaks poster or image or something. And originally you like to write through the night, like when it's quiet. And I feel like a lot of people share that sentiment. Is it the quiet or the darkness? Or I'd love to hear a little bit about the bunker that is.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the writing at night because that's something that left to my own devices, I would always prefer to do. And it was such a luxury to be able to start writing in my 20s and be able to be like, oh, if I feel like, the muse visits me at 4 a.m., that's great. And I could just, my wife and I lived on completely different schedules where she was living on a human schedule. And I would go to bed at 7 a.m. as she was leaving for work, and I would sleep till 4 p.m. in New York and wake up and talk to editors for maybe an hour or so and have breakfast at, when my wife came home for dinner. And it was so nice, and then you just chill out, you hang out with your significant other till midnight. And then the world shuts down and it's yours. And just from 12 to 6 a.m., I can go out for a stroll. I can do whatever, and the phone isn't ringing. There's nothing interesting happening on the internet. It's just pure writing. So I love it. And my damn children have ruined that completely. There's no way you can write overnight and be a father. So I've had to learn to be this Johnny Lunchpail 9 to 5 writer, and it's been extremely difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do. I have this kind of flophouse bunker that I was using for writing, just a little apartment that would go to try to simulate how it feels to write at night. So no Wi-Fi, no distractions, because I am so easily distracted. I don't listen to music. I just need total silence. But actually, I gave up that bunker during the pandemic. At the beginning of it, because I could hear my neighbors coughing through the thin walls of this place. And I was just so terrified. And I was like, well, I guess the bunker has come to a close. So during the pandemic, I started writing at home, which was initially really hard, but not really hard the way having an actual job is. It's still writing. It's just doing this all day. It's fine. But yeah, so I'm back at home, but I do have kind of a little basement retreat that I go down to, but it's not the same separation that it used to be. And that's not a bad thing. I like learning how to be back home and right here. So. Yeah,
it sounds like a huge, you'd had to adapt quite a bit, but I guess everyone did, right? Through COVID, there was so much that happened, and hopefully your whole family, all of you are safe and you guys ended up fine. I see following you, everything looks like kind of quote unquote normal, whatever the new normal is. But I was grateful to get little snippets of here's what Brian is up to and that you were writing, which was always very exciting because, we're also anxious to see the next thing. And one of the things I also really love is how you respond to your letters that you get in the mail. And I love that it's actual mail because I used to have pen pals. I love writing, and I think there's something really beautiful and personal about it. But I'm always too terrified, too embarrassed, too in my head to ever have actually written a letter into any of my favorites, like Saga or Y or any of those. There's no way it would take me forever. It would take me longer than you're writing Saga, which is a long time. I just don't feel like I'd ever have anything clever enough. And I always feel like your responses are so well thought out and very funny. And I wonder, does it take you a while to respond, or is it just, you're just kind of on the fly and that's just who you are?
It takes so embarrassingly long to write those letter columns. The one that's coming up in 60 is we did this reader survey where we asked 25 questions, and people, it turns out, love answering questions about themselves. So we got over 1,000 people ripped out the back of their comic and sent it in. And so, but I feel compelled to read them all because it is so intriguing. Readers are so interesting and the answers are so good. But yes, I think it definitely took me longer to write the issue 60 letter column than it took to write issue 60, which is an embarrassing thing to admit. But I so loved Garth Ennis's letter column in the back of Preacher. Optic Nerve was a comic that was the first one I read that had a P.O. box. And that's where I stole the idea from. I thought, oh, this is so clever that you're going to get much more interesting responses. And it also sort of, it filters out just jerks that no one's going to take the time or waste a stamp, so that it's very easy to email the most hateful stuff to people. And it's much more challenging to mail it in. So it's sort of a self-selecting group of awesome people.
Absolutely.
That end up writing in.
Very, very, very smart. And one of the things I took note of is that you sometimes give out like advice, or people ask a question. You're really gracious to actually answer really earnestly. And one of the pieces was a writing advice. And our listeners from my previous creators always love when you amazing writers give advice. And you wrote something about just write 5 pages of anything. And I was curious if you did that in school, or is that something that you still do? And I'm just curious about what you would write. Well, what's your 5 pages of anything? What does that end up being for you?
It started my senior year of high school, and I had a writing teacher named Mr. Toner. He was a great guy. And I took this class, it was an elective, I guess, but it's called Writing the Novel. And he said, we're just, you guys are each going to write a book this semester. And which is an insane thing to tell children. But he's like, you can do this. Just write 5 pages every night, go home. And that's when I started doing it. And it was so hard at first. Just 5 pages seems like so much. But he was like, just do it the first week, do it the second week. And by that second week, it just became natural. When I got home from school, it would start to feel weird if I didn't get those 5 pages out. And it was so rewarding because it was, I'm clearly, obviously not an athlete, but this must how it must feel for my athlete friends when you train and you get to see those benefits immediately. That if you write 5 pages a week for, 5 nights, you will be a better writer by the 5th day than you were at the first day, and you'll notice it. And so it was exciting and rewarding. And so I just decided I'm going to keep going after this class ended. And I wrote an entire terrible novel. It's like, I'm just going to keep doing this forever. And it doesn't matter, if I don't have anything to say that day, I'll just write about what happened that day and do bad journal entries. But 5 pages a day is really the way to go.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. And you mentioned you wrote a really quote unquote bad novel. I highly doubt that, first of all. But all right, do you have an interest in prose, or have you done that? I try to look and see, but
I think I have an X-Men short story that I wrote right out of college that got published, a prose story somewhere that I would be reluctant to revisit in my old age. But no, I used to think, I would love to write a novel, but then, it's just getting to work with Cliff Chang, getting to work with Fiona Staples. Writing comics is the greatest job in the world. It is so easy. Just all the lovely parts about writing, like the dialogue is fun to write, and so little of the heavy lifting that you just force onto your poor collaborators, and they do all the hard stuff and make you look great. I think I'm a comic book lifer. I think this is the medium that makes me happiest. So, maybe there'll be a book in me someday, but I'm not in a hurry to do it. I would much rather do another long form ongoing series or something.
Yeah, well, that either way, it's great for all of us. So we enjoy the comics. So keep at that, obviously.
I will.
The collaboration is something I'm always really interested in particular, of course, Fiona Staples. And I loved, obviously, Paper Girls. I could go on and on and on. All your collaborations are fantastic. Do you kind of know who, based on your story and the style that you're looking for, like who you want to collaborate with, and what is it like, that process for you? Because I know that varies between creators as well. Like sometimes it's a phone call, sometimes it's just like, sending things back and forth. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's completely different each time. I've had some times where, it was the editor just paired me with the
Okay.
it was like an arranged marriage, just get thrown together, and sometimes that works out beautifully. And Saga was a case where I had sort of, this gem of or seed of an idea, but I didn't know who my collaborator was going to be, and it was really hard because I knew it was going to be a story about family, but it wasn't going to be family friendly.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to have a lot of extreme violence, which almost no artist has a problem with at all. But it's also going to have nudity and sexuality, which about 90% of comic artists, surprisingly, aren't interested in doing. They're like, I grew up on Marvel and DC, and my parents are going to read this. There, so
they don't want to do nude
creators,
giants.
no, and no one does. But so it was hard to find the right person. So Fiona was a case of me just reaching out to some other writer friends, and it was Steve Niles, a writer, who I said, I'm looking for someone who can and will draw anything. And he said, well, you should reach out to Fiona. And I'll admit that Fiona was an artist who'd been on my radar. I'd seen some of her stuff, but I hadn't thought of her for this, for Saga. I thought of her as sort of a different idea. And I was like, I don't know. Would she have any interest in space opera? But so we just talked on the phone for a bit, and, she talked about what she loved, and and it just felt like, this seems like just a smart, kind, interesting person. She liked 2001 and Starship Troopers and the same things I did. But I would say like, it's going to be about this family going around a rocket ship. And she was like, okay, I hate drawing technology. That's not my favorite thing. I was like, oh no, maybe this isn't the right person.
Yeah.
But that's when I was like, well, why does a rocket ship have to be mechanical in this universe? So the rocket ship treehouse is born. And it was just every conversation with her, and she'd say, I don't like this, or how about this? It wasn't a limitation. I could just sense, oh, this is becoming a story now. This is something I never could have done as a novel. I needed a partner, and this is the partner who's going to make it happen. So it was just thrilling, and obviously worked out better than I ever could have imagined.
Yeah, it's really, really unbelievable. Like you said, I can imagine when the first time you saw the end of our first, before you take the break, of Marco, and just what that might have felt like for you, and just because what she captures in just every detail, and from beginning to end, from the covers to the end, it's so phenomenal to see things come to life. But in the same way of seeing Ampersand on Uric, and seeing the four girls on their bikes, and just that, I consider myself a child of the 80s, so that particular project really was another one I had to read twice, not just because of that. Anything with time travel, it's like Total Recall. I had to go back and watch it twice. So it's kind of mind blowing, but
I understand.
I love those collaborations. And I also noticed that you wrote in the back matter, like your friendships through your career and collaborations have been much more important than the stories you write. Of course, we're grateful for the stories you write, but I'd love for you to, if you're open to sharing some of the friendships that you've created, maybe not even from collaboration, but in the industry, that you feel are kind of those lifelong pals that you have, because I feel like you guys have a bond, having empathy of knowing what it's like to go through the process of what you guys go through.
Yeah, no, there was a time that my wife and I got to go around France with Urban, our terrific French publisher, and they brought along Cliff Chang and Fiona Staples, and just to get to go around, I was like, even if we were not collaborating, Cliff and Fiona would be two of my favorite human beings on the planet. They're just everything you want out of a person. They're just hilarious and kind, but also really honest with me. And I think never afraid to tell me when I've done something dumb, or and they challenge me. So yeah, I think about Steve Scroce, who's the We Stand on Guard collaborator. He's become one of my best friends. We were just hanging out in San Francisco a few months ago. Yeah, I've been so lucky to meet such wonderful people. Pia Guerra, Why the Last Man, Tony Harris on Ex Machina. These are all people that I think of first and foremost. They're my family. And, sometimes we intersect and do business together and make art. But first and foremost, they're just people I love.
Yeah. And, speaking of people you love, I love that you met your wife in school. Was it high school or college?
College, yeah.
College. At NYU, Tish. And do you consider yourself a romantic? Because you do capture relationships so beautifully where I'm like naturally rooting for something before you kill them off. But you really do capture that, that kind of romantic part of things, even amidst a war or even amidst a battle, somehow there's romance. And so I was curious about that story, but also if you think you're like a romantic at heart.
I wish my wife were home right now to explain how much of a romantic I am not. This is the fiction of my world. But no, I don't think I am naturally. I don't. I mean, I love romance. I love drama. Yes. So, but no, I like to. I guess the writers I admire tend to be the ones who explore a lot of crazy horror, but they're very stable in their real life. And like getting to meet Stephen King, who is like I've read some of the most upsetting, challenging, horrific things ever in his fiction. Meeting him, realize, he is such a deeply well-adjusted, beautiful person, and I don't think it's a coincidence. I think a lot of us use writing to sort of work out our fears about the world and our misgivings and our neuroses, and it helps keep us calm. So, I try to keep the drama on the page more so than in my real life.
I hope I do get the opportunity one day to actually talk to your wife and mention that, that I hear Brian's the biggest romantic.
Well, she is an extraordinary writer, and we met in school. She was a playwright and remains a playwright, is now writing novels, unlike me. And so, it's fun to live with another writer. And I always joke that I'm usually upstairs writing lowbrow stuff, and she's downstairs writing highbrow stuff. So I have all the monkeys and ray guns, and then she does sort of thoughtful geopolitical tales about the world.
Do you like not check each other's work, but do you get feedback? And because I know a lot of Kelly, Stu, and Matt, and we've got, Greg and Jen. So I know there's a lot of couples that they're both amazing writers. And so is there a kind of back and forth with that?
Not too much. I used to fantasize about like, is this what it's like? Like we'll have two typewriters sort of facing each other, and we're sitting at the table and both passing pages back and forth. No, I think we give each other a lot of space during the creative process, because I think as writers, we both know things are so fragile in these early stages, and they're so sort of embryonic, and it's easy for them to miscarry, I guess, to use an extreme analogy. So I guess it's like, we're very respectful and private until it's done. And then we always love reading each other's work. But I don't think so much anymore. I guess back in the day, we used to sort of, and I would use at a sort of a squad of friends, my brother, Devin Grayson, a comic book writer, Jay Ferber, and Ruth, my wife, would be sort of this star chamber of, I would send my earliest comic scripts to each of them and get their feedback. But it felt like after about 2 years of doing this, one, you're exploiting so much of your friends and loved ones' time. But it's also after about 2 years of getting their feedback, you start to internalize it, and you know what they're going to say before they say it. And it feels like such a gift that I do feel like I have a Ruth in my head at all times when I'm writing, and I know what she would say. So I don't want to say that we've never shared, or that writers shouldn't. You should definitely find, I think, your squad, your team that you trust to share things with. But after a while, you have to, if you love them, let them go, and have it just be yours.
Yeah. And, I don't know what you just said about you both like with typewriters next to each other. That was kind of romantic, actually.
Well, it's a fiction. So like all of my romance, it's not real.
But it's the notion of it. It's the notion. And, speaking of like the experience and things that you're doing, I also love that you keep or kept rejection letters, and that those had some significance to you. I love learning from things as a martial arts teacher. It's all about like the things we did wrong or quote unquote, that we didn't achieve quite yet. Those are the bigger learning times, right? It's like whenever you make a mistake, that's the bigger learning curve. So I'd love to hear about the rejection letters and what that means.
That's amazing. Wow, that's a really deep dive you did to find that factoid. I feel like I haven't. It's such a shameful, obnoxious young writer thing, but I remember in the sort of late 90s, as I was breaking in, I would just send query letters or whatever to anyone. And I would get back a lot, and I would tape them up to my wall. And as a joke, I would usually write "P.S. You suck" at the bottom of them because they're always so kind. Usually they'd say, "Thank you for sending us your stuff. We don't have space for you." And I just say "P.S. You suck" and stick it up on the wall. But I liked having there's just sort of a remind, like, I wish I could say that writing was just driven by love and passion and something to say, but a lot of writing is driven by revenge and this idea of I'll show you that you turned me down. I'm going to find a place to tell this story. And I don't know. It seems when I think back to it now, kind of sad to be that person that I was, but I was angry. I think I was definitely a very angry young writer, and I'm glad I'm not anymore.
Well, I think like all of us, as we get older and wiser, perhaps like in experience, right? You kind of see things through a different lens. I love that if you could share even just a little more about that beginning of breaking into the industry, so to speak, because a lot of people have shared different stories about, it was, this creator that helped bring me on board, or I just got really lucky with this break. And I think a lot of people just kind of see your work now and all of the accolade and be like, well, he's just really amazing. So obviously it was easy for him. Right. And I never find that it's ever quote unquote easy, because anything that is done at the caliber of writing that you're doing is because you've put in thousands of hours and work and revenge writing and whatnot. But I'd love to hear like how that first, you got your break kind of feeling was like for you.
Yeah, well, comics is very different because it is hard for everyone, but I always say it's not like becoming a dentist. Becoming a dentist is very hard, but if you want to become a dentist, you know what the path is. You know how many years of this, how much apprenticeship you're going to do, and how to get to your end goal. Comics, there is no straight path, and it's actually the opposite that people have described before. Comics is this sort of impenetrable castle. And if you find a way in, they immediately plug up that hole. So no one will ever be able to do it quite that same way again. So you need to be creative doubly so as a young creator, because one, you're being creative in the stories you want to tell, but also you have to be wildly creative. It's like a heist movie. How are you going to break into this thing? And there's never one day where it feels like I've broken in. I was very lucky when I was at NYU that there was this Stanhattan project that a Marvel editor started this program where he's like, we should find young writers, and NYU is training them. They'll probably work for cheap. So let's just teach them about how comic scripts are made. So that was an incredible opportunity that I had. And from that, I got thrown some little jobs at Marvel. And, I remember getting my first check with Spider-Man on it and being like, I've made it, I'm in. But then, I feel like, but now editors aren't returning my calls or asking me for more work. So I applied for an internship at Marvel. And I was like, I literally have my name in a Marvel book. I've written a Marvel book, and I was not hired as an intern there. I got passed over. So you realize like, have I broken in? Or it feels like I'm less in than I was before I wrote this book. So yeah, it was a long process, and it was just early on. I think the writer Dave Eggers says that there are sort of two phases of a writer's career. There's where you say yes to everything, and then where you say no to almost everything. And it was just a time where I said yes to everything, anything that was out there. If you have a Wonder Woman spinoff, I'd love to write it. If you have a Turkish Justice League annual, I'd love to write it. Kazar, whatever you've got, just saying yes to anything and trying to give it my all and have it be something I was really proud of. But I really don't feel like I broke in until I think Why the Last Man came out. Even as I was working on it, there was such a sense inside Vertigo that I think like, well, this book's not going to work. We're probably going to put out a few issues and it'll be quietly canceled. But I was proud. I was like, I think this will be the end of my comics career. I will go and try something else after Y gets canceled. But at least I'm leaving this weird industry on my own terms, that Pia and I have done exactly what we wanted to do with this first issue. But then when that issue came out and people actually liked it, I was like, oh, I might be able to make a career out of this. But that was several years from that first Marvel paycheck until Y came out. So yeah, just a long, ongoing slog to break in.
And I feel very connected to your writing, I think, because also like you like, oh, I started with the superhero stuff. And that's what we think of when we think of comics. And anytime I try to recruit people to comics, like, I don't really like Superman. I don't want to read that. I'm like, I get you, but there's some great stuff. However, I'm the same. Like I'm like, you kind of know what those stories are, right? Because they're superhero stories and there's some great value to it, some amazing arcs. And, of course I love Wonder Woman, and, what Kelly Sue just did with Wonder Woman is not a superhero book by any means. It's something special, but like, that's why the Last Man was so huge for me. It was like literature, but with pictures, and it was just like the best of both worlds of making me feel like, yeah, I'm reading something that has, a lot of controversy and value, but it's got pictures in it, which is freaking awesome. And so, was it really like just for you to kind of go, oh, great, I can actually do my own thing. And it's even better for me. Like it must have been just really remarkable to kind of go, oh, I don't have to write what other people are telling me to write now. Now I get to write what I want to write. I mean, how did that feel? It must have been.
Oh, yeah. It was great. It was a dream because I got to sort of evolve as a creator, like I got to evolve as a writer, that I started out reading Marvel and DC books and loving them, but then sort of graduating to more following writers and following creator-owned books. And so that was always my goal as a creator, that I love Marvel and DC. I love these characters, but I knew that it wasn't really where my skills were at. Whenever I set to try and write other people's characters, it felt like there's some disconnect, and getting to write my own characters and to have sort of no editorial constraints, that I just want to tell the story the way I want to tell it. And I know it's weird and it's going to take a lot of tonal shifts that I think a lot of publishers and studios hate, that they really like having a consistent tone. You can be wacky, you can be terrifying, but you should never be both. And I've always loved getting to do it all, to have a really funny moment and then a page turn to just the worst thing you've ever seen. And there's a lot of resistance, I think, to that. I just always felt like I like reading stories like these, and I bet other people will too. So yeah, it was just such I'm just so grateful for the confirmation that yes, people do like these kind of things. But I do. I also recognize, a lot of the reason that Why the Last Man was successful or so literate, as you say, is because of Pia Guerra. That it was her artwork. Fiona's artwork is the same. Cliff Chang's artwork is the same way. I think a lot of my stuff is kind of esoteric and strange or creepy, and you need someone to decode me. And Pia Guerra just right away decoded me. And decoding is even not even the right word. There's something beyond elevating, that she just saw there's something in here, but she wouldn't, the dialogue wouldn't change. I would give her all the dialogue, but then seeing her acting, seeing Yorick say a line of mine that wasn't, quite great in my head, it would just become so much better. And seeing Clem Robbins, our letterer on Why the Last Man, I was like, oh, his font is so classy. It makes my writing better. That it was realizing that, oh yeah, it's not so much that I'm hot shit, Brian, but it's more like, oh, you require other people to do this. Other people will make this something that other people will enjoy. So learn to be a better collaborator, that you are not the dictator here. The writer isn't the director of this story. I am one piece of this band, and just sort of know your place and give everyone else room to shine. But that took a long time to learn.
I'm sure. And you were just talking about those hilarious moments, but violent or heartbreaking and all of that happening at the same time. One of my favorites is the meet cute between Marco and Alana, because it speaks to me, because I love how she's just fiery and sort of violent, and I kind of feel that. I get her, but then it's like super romantic. Is there like a panel in your mind from Y or Paper Girls or Pride or anything that is like kind of like one of those for you that like just pulls on your heartstrings in all the different ways, that because there's so many to choose from, and I'm not saying a favorite, but like for me that was just. I just love that. I love that panel for some reason, because it just establishes so much about them. But yeah, I was curious if you had one that jumps out.
It happens monthly in Saga. It's so hard to say, but I'd say it's usually, it'll be not the moment that I thought of. That I'll usually, give Fiona some room for a magnificent splash page or something, but it'll always be just some quiet character moment where she devastates me. Or just does some sort of unexpected bit of business, the way that one character touches another character, so it's the subtlety. I tend to be the least subtle writer in all of writing. And I think I work with such subtle, sophisticated collaborators. So to see when they sort of recognize maybe something in the story that I didn't, that's magical. But I wish I had a good example, but there's something in issue 60 that's coming up of Saga that I won't spoil for it, but I hope you'll know it when you read it. There's just something that's so magnificent that you'll see.
Okay, excellent. And, speaking of, like you said, working with a team and learning that you are a part of a whole, and with comics, that's certainly the case, but you definitely had experience also working in like writer's room for TV on Lost and did you love the TV experience? And I know you're saying I'm comics, right till I die. Like that's your place, but clearly you excel in that area as well. And from speaking with, especially with Greg now, like doing film and all of these things, it's completely different. Like it's just a different part of you. What was that like for you? And do you see yourself doing more?
Maybe, but it definitely didn't come naturally to me. It's hard. But because it is so different from being a comic book writer where it is a very lonely job sometimes, even because you have collaborators. A lot of times, you go months without speaking to them other than, you're sort of trading pages back and forth, but there's not a lot of talking. So it's sort of like you have this writer's room in your head. Like I described my wife, I have Ruth in my head and all these other writer friends, but to then externalize that and be in a room with actual other human beings, and to have to know like, I need to articulate an idea, but it's not formed yet. And it's just sort of to embarrass yourself to say sort of half-formed things. It was hard. And to learn even what is my place as a writer on something like Lost, where, I always described it as sort of like you're a presidential speechwriter. When you come into a show like that, you are not the president. Your job is not to make policy. It is you're there to help the policies get through, to make the president look good. And it was really challenging, but super rewarding, but just so different from comics that I feel like I sort of, this pendulum swings back and forth in my career where I'll go for a while and I'll do Hollywood stuff for a while. And then I'll be like, I can't do this anymore. Introvert Brian is going crazy. This is too many other people and too many other voices. And then I go hide and do comics for a few years. And then I say, God, I really miss not just other writers, but I miss musicians. Getting to see music over your writing is an incredible, extraordinary experience that, for all the joys of comics, it's one thing comics can't do. So there are things I like about it, and there are things I miss about it. But right now, where it seems to be Spectators and Saga are taking up most of my time, I love it. I've never been happier.
Yeah. And, speaking of Spectators, I have to say I told my husband, because he's obviously really into your writing as well. I'm like, it's pretty typical, Brian K. Vaughan. It's very violent and heartbreaking, and also brings about a lot of the issues of today, right? A lot of your writing, like, of course, Pride of Baghdad, it just like really brings, I guess that would be an allegory, right? Maybe, no, yes, I wasn't great at English, but
Sure. No, I'm not either. And I never know what's an allegory, what's
Is that
just a
the
story.
allegory, or
Yeah.
is it?
I
And you just bring kind of to light in this really not so subtle, as you say, way, but I feel like that's what we need to be like punched in the face sometimes. And boy, Spectators certainly does that from like the second page or whatever it was once you get that first impact. Talk to me a little bit about that and what was on your mind, Brian.
Yeah. Well, this is a story I wanted to tell for a long time. And yeah, I think it is. All of my stories have dealt with death to some extent and violence, but I think this is really born out of being middle-aged and really thinking about, both my parents are alive and well, I'm happy to say, but you think about losing them and you think about your own life coming to a close and dealing with your own mortality. So that was one thing I wanted to deal with, not in a way like, oh, I have it all figured out. So here's the tale I want to tell. I always write because there's something that I'm confused and terrified about, and I want to understand it for myself better. So I know I wanted to write about death, but I also wanted to write about why we like to watch things. I'm a viewer more than I'm a writer. I probably spend as much of my time watching things as I do creating things. But I think about why I watch so much violence, and my children watch so much violence. You're as a kid at just any cartoons, you're exposed to violence at a pretty early age. Taking them to see Star Wars, you see severed limbs right away. And sexuality, I think a lot of us spend a lot of time watching sex, but we do it in a completely different way, a private, sort of shameful way, particularly here in America. And so I wanted to talk about the differences between, particularly here in the States, why we watch sex one way, why we watch violence another way. And so, I had this idea about a voyeuristic ghost. And so this is someone who just likes to watch. And she is, she can't possess people. She can't sort of knock over objects. It's not, all she can do is be a passive observer. I thought that would be a very interesting story, to see someone who died in our terrible present here in 2022, haunting our distant future and what they might have to see about it. And it's just an opportunity, again, to work with Nico Henrischen, who is my collaborator on Pride of Baghdad. And I just think is one of the best artists alive. And he's so skilled, but I made him draw so many animals, and he draws animals so well. But I wanted to give him an opportunity to also draw human beings. I think he's just unparalleled at that as well. So to get to see him telling this story in this beautiful future New York City that he's created, and thanks to this wacky Substack deal that we've got, that we're able to release it a few pages at a time for free to people, it's been incredible. Because I know Pride of Baghdad, it took us like 2 years to make that book, and we just made it in complete isolation. And it's really scary to work on something like that. We're usually used in comics, every 22 pages, you get that instant gratification of sending it out into the world and getting people's feedback. And I knew this is really a graphic novel. Spectators is a self-contained, it's going to be eventually a 300 plus page thing. But it's like, it'll be scary and lonely to do that again. And with Substack, now we're like, we kind of have the best of both worlds, that someday we hope this will be a physical thing you can hold in your hands. But right now, you don't have to wait. You can kind of watch in real time as we put out, 3 or 4 pages every week for people. So our site, in honor of a famous moment in Pride of Baghdad, is called Exploding Giraffe. So if your listeners or viewers just Google Exploding Giraffe, it will take you right to Spectators. And our story is extremely not safe for work, but I'm very proud of it. And it's free. So give it a try. And there are opportunities if you'd like to contribute to help us finish the book, you can do that, but you don't have to. We're happy just for anyone to read our stuff.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to link all of that here, of course, for everyone too. And,
Awesome.
Speaking of grown up stuff, you do write a lot of grown up stuff. And I know that you've got kids and everything. And I had, Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky on talking about sex criminals. I'm like, well, this one's not for the kids, but do you feel like there's a part of you that wants to write like something for a really young audience because you have children, or you're just going to be like, well, this will be on the shelf when I decide that you're ready for this kind of thing?
I guess when I had children, I had noticed that sometimes when creators have children, their first instinct is, I want to do something for them.
Yeah.
And I have to say that most of the time, those things are terrible. I discovered that there is something about writing that is deeply selfish and requires a kind of weird narcissism that you think whatever is inside of you is worth sharing with other people. So I wanted to avoid, when I had kids, immediately doing, here's my picture book that's meant for them. And it feels like that in a weird way is more narcissistic and more just for you. That I wanted to push myself to do a story that not only is not for kids, that they will be forbidden to look at it for a while. And it's nice. I used to think that, I'll have to keep Saga on a different shelf. So my kids have so little interest in that, thankfully.
That's what I always hear. Well, Runaways is kind of, that's kind of younger. Like it's not Spectators or, but
I don't know. I remember there was a point I went somewhere and I was with my young nieces and nephews, and they were handing out, I think it was like a free comic day copy of Runaways #1. And one of the kids was flipping through it. And I think there's a line at one point where Gert says, your parents are lying to you constantly about, this isn't going to hurt a bit. Santa Claus, God. And the kid just said, Santa Claus? I was like, oh no, I think I just ruined Santa Claus through Runaways. And I realized Runaways is not a super appropriate book for kids. It was written when I was that angry young man who's like, the parents are evil. Don't trust your parents. All adults are evil. Run away as soon as possible and don't listen to anything they say. It's a wild thing to hand to kids. So, but it's cool. I'm glad that I could write sort of a subversive kids book. That's probably not something I would write now.
Teen book, maybe.
Exactly. But
they can read Usagi or
sure.
some cute. Yeah, they're.
But I try not to. My parents were great about that when I was young. They were like, if you're reading, we don't care if it's the anarchist cookbook and you're reading how to build pipe bombs. You're reading at least. And I'm the same way. That my kids, I don't think that there's really anything inappropriate that can come from even sex. I think it's kind of weird that we're so protective of oh my God, if there's a nipple, and I hear constantly about my comics being challenged by school boards or banned. And it's always because of sex. And you realize but we have a bottomless appetite for violence. And I think it screws us up. It's a weird thing. So I try not to. I say, look, there's going to be some grown-up stuff in this story. And if you have questions or concerns, come to me. But they're just interesting, fascinating little people. And I have read Paper Girls, and I think they enjoyed it. And I think they were creeped out by the smoking, which was cool to see. That it is smoking is something
cancer.
that they exactly. And they're like, it's also something that they never see in fiction. And I remember I showed them Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and there's which they loved. It was interesting, but there was one scene where Ferris goes into a fancy restaurant and there are a bunch of adults smoking, and my kids were immediately like, oh, is this what the movie is about? Are these people going to be arrested? They just couldn't get over. They're like, but whatever happened to the smoking people in the restaurant? Why wasn't that? And so you never know what your kids will glom onto from your past or be creeped out by. So.
Yeah, that is so adorable. That is really funny because don't have them watch Mad Men. It'll just be like, oh my gosh.
Oh yeah.
I felt like I was getting cancer watching it.
Exactly.
It's like anything from that era. But I think it's always a lot of fun. And I think you're completely right. And I don't want to go into it too much, but I'm a huge advocate for, early childhood education, for sex education, especially, it's AAPI heritage as I'm talking to you, as well as mental health awareness. And it's one of the things that I advocate about, and making sure that just reminding people like this is an important thing for kids to learn as early as possible, because then it's not a big deal, right? It's not a big thing. And also it's something that's really missing. And you're right, in this country, we're okay with the violence, but yet, heaven forbid a sex scene comes on and then they're like you said, your books are getting banned and all of those kind of things. And, it's actually doing you a favor, because once your book's banned, everyone just wants to read it more, I think. So
it is 100% true. And you realize how foolish it is that the people who are doing the quote unquote banning are doing it to get attention for themselves. It's never born out of a genuine concern for children. No. And yeah, it is right. I just see anytime it happens, you can, watch the numbers of your sales and books go up. And I'm like, this is a ridiculous charade that we're all going through together, but so it goes.
100%. And, I know we're wrapping up soon, but I did want to talk a little bit about The Private Eye, because it's kind of different from your other work. And I love it. And my husband is a huge noir detective story. Awesome. He reads from prose all the way, so that is one of his favorites of yours. And, and he also digests anything by your arch enemy, frenemy, Ed Brubaker. And I have to ask about The Private Eye, and what your inspiration was, because it's kind of a little bit different from a lot of your other stuff, but still so Brian. And then I need to ask about you and Ed's, you constantly allude to him in your newsletter. And I think it's adorable, because now having gotten to know him, it's a lot of fun.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'll start with the Private Eyes. So much of that is thanks to Marcos Martin, who's an artist who's working with my arch nemesis, Ed Brubaker, now in a new series, Friday, over at Panel Syndicate, is a site that Marcos started, panelsyndicate.com. It was Marcos's idea that, we can put out comics for, whatever people can pay. And it's something that worked out magnificently, that I was always like, Marcos, this is never going to work. But I'm so proud the Panel Syndicate is still around and still putting out comics. You can still go read Private Eye today for free for whatever you'd like to contribute. It's there. But yeah, Private Eye was really about privacy, I guess, was something that I feel like I try to be a private person, and I try to, there are things I like to protect about myself and about my family. And I saw how hard that the internet was sort of encroaching on how our privacy was sort of, it was at risk, and things were changing. And so, I wanted to talk about this idea of what does privacy even mean in the 21st century? And, it's sort of it more than anything else I worked on came together very quickly. I guess what I thought about this future, about sort of a flood, that we keep all of our secrets in the cloud, but what if one day there was a flood and everything came out, and you could read every text message, every secret DM that you'd ever sent in your life was just all exposed for everyone to see? And how might people change? And what if we all had secret identities? And is that a bad thing? That I guess in those early frontier days of the internet, we all had sort of silly internet handles, but there was kind of a charm to it that we all had some degree of anonymity. And anonymity is extremely hard to achieve these days. So again, this is something I was frightened and confused about, didn't have all the answers to, but thought if I had in some cool costumes and some beautiful artwork from Marcos that people might be into it. But thank you. I'm super proud of that book.
Oh yeah. So fantastic.
And, but yeah, Ed Brubaker is, it's hard because he's one of the sweetest, loveliest, kindest people in the world. But I've always felt very competitive with him, because I think, we have very similar taste, I think, in collaborators. But early on, as we were breaking in, we were competing to write Batman together. And he got a Batman gig that I didn't. And I was like, well, I'm done with comics forever. I don't have anything left. And that's when I went to go write Why. And so I'm so grateful, because it felt like at any turn that Ed rightfully got something that I didn't, it only pushed me more in the direction of where I should have gone. But yeah, he's just, he's an inspiration. I think he's smart about his career moves, and that drives me crazy. And I'd love to see him just once, just fail. I just put out something that wasn't brilliant, but he just keeps doing it, and it's annoying. So,
I will say a lot of people say about the same about you, sir. So.
Well, that's nice. It would be nice to think there are people who hate me out there the way that I hate it.
I think so. I think so. Being that, you're kind of like the Meryl Streep of comics when it comes to awards. I'm like, oh, it's like 14 Eisners and Harveys and the Hugo. And does it get tiring, sir? Does it get tiring winning all the awards? Or is it still kind of like shocking to you or a surprise? But I feel like by now you kind of know when you're hitting it out of the park.
I guess as a young NYU film student, I was always jaded. And like, awards are stupid. Like, look at how many awards did Citizen Kane get? How many awards has Scorsese gotten? And then look at all this junk, this trash. That awards are dumb and meaningless. They're arbitrary. I don't think art should be a competition. I think it should be a collective. We should all be celebrating each other. But then you win something and you're like, oh, this is right on. I really enjoy this a lot.
It feels good.
Yeah, and these guys are pretty smart. These judges seem like they know exactly what they're talking about. So deep down, I am still that jaded young film student who realizes awards are silly and they are meaningless. And yet, it doesn't get old, and it is extremely nice validation when it happens. So yeah, and some things like that Hugo Award, that's just the coolest sculpture in the world. It's a giant rocket ship. I wish I had it.
It looks like it looks like a weapon. Like
you could absolutely bludgeon an
and I
intruder.
Are talking about it all the time. Like how many times, how can we use this as a weapon in different ways? Like we had a whole episode on it. Actually, it was like fascinating. So it's very cool. Very cool.
I love it. So no, I'm very grateful. If anyone would like to give any of my collaborators me another one, we're not those creators like, no, we're going to take ourselves out of the running. No way. I want to win every one of these damn things that I can, but I haven't written anything in like 3 years. So I'm excited to get back in the game again and
lovely.
See if I can beat Ed for something.
Right. There you go. Because that's more gratifying. You need to be in the same category, and then
nothing would be better.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to have him back on the show now. We're gonna have to talk about this because I don't know if he feels the same way about you in the way.
No, that's the worst part about it is that this is not mutual. He's just like, Brian, who? Oh yeah, no, Brian's a nice guy, right? There's no, but it's weird to have someone that you're consumed and competitive with, and he's just a pleasant chap. I don't think I'm on Ed's radar the same way.
I love it. One of the other things that you did also talk about and that I was fascinated about, because I like to think about like the young Brian reading. And you said that 8th grade reading had a huge impact on you, like Animal Farm, Ender's Game, The Good Earth, Hitchhiker's Guide, and To Kill a Mockingbird, which those last two I hear kind of repeated a lot, that they're always kind of mentioned. And I kind of feel the same way. Like I just did a reread of To Kill a Mockingbird last year. During the COVID, we're like, what should we reread? And
does it hold up? By the way, To Kill a Mockingbird, did it work for you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, unfortunately, probably because a lot of the same issues stand today, and so whenever you feel like you're not moving forward in time, it's frustrating, right? And so to kind of hear something from XYZ years ago, and they go, huh? Because I just watched the George Carlin documentary.
Oh yeah, cool.
That he's like, talking about 20 years ago. I'll go, well, gee, we're kind of back in that same spot now or whatever. And so that is kind of depressing. But the fact that someone can write something that's so timeless and evergreen is kind of brilliant at the same time, but depressing, right? That we as a society can't do better as humans, and we're working on it. I mean, there's people like you out there that's doing the good stuff, but it's frustrating. But I was curious as to your thoughts as to whether you feel like those books in particular is the age you read them, or is it the books themselves? Like, or because of kind of the question that you had asked me, I feel like everybody has a little bit of a different take on that.
I mean, it's a combination. I definitely think around 12 and 13 is just that as prime. You are just soil that is ready to have stuff be planted in you, and amazing things are going to emerge. So definitely, I think when you're 12 and 13, you should be not careful you should just be ravenous and just consuming so much, because odds are something is going to hit you deep. You don't know what it'll be, but I'm just so grateful to Miss Spike, my 8th grade English teacher, because I also think sometimes you need a good guide to take you through these things. And sometimes it's fun to just go to the library and discover a dirty book on your own. And that feels but it's a real gift to have a good guide there to challenge you. And I remember To Kill a Mockingbird and starting to read it and be like, this is narrated by this little girl, but it's from the future. But so this is boring. I know nothing's going to happen to her. Everything's going to be fine. And you cut to 20 years and I'm obviously ripping off this device and saga. And readers are telling me wait, so she's narrating it from the future. So we know she's going to be okay. This takes all the stakes out of the book. And you're just wait and see. Just like Miss Spike told me, wait and see. You'll be concerned about everyone else in this book so deeply because you have this sort of one guide. And so, your age, what you choose to read, and who you're around all matters a great deal.
Yeah. And curious, what are your rereads? Are there certain books that ever so often you go, okay, it's time. I'm going to give this a reread right now. I know you said you're visual. I'd love to hear about your favorite shows as well in a minute, but.
I mean, I guess Watchmen is the one book that really changed my life and is something that I revisit. And I feel like I discover something new each time I do. But usually I'm reluctant to, because a lot of times I'll revisit something that I love and I don't love it as much anymore. And it's not because it's changed, obviously, just because I've changed and the world has changed. Usually I've taken so much from this work and other creators have taken so much from that work. So it's lost its freshness. It's a lot of times it'll make me sad to revisit things. And I'm not a super nostalgic person. I'm grateful that my parents were not nostalgic either, that they always seemed interested in contemporary life and what was going on. And I thought that was a cool policy, that they're not trapped in the music that they like, that they're curious about what we were listening to and what we were reading. And so I guess I've always, if I have time to reread something, I would much rather read one of the 32 new novels that's on my stack that I haven't gotten around to yet. So, but I guess having kids is a nice excuse to revisit things because at least then you're not just watching it for yourself. You have this audience. They're like, oh, get ready. You're going to love this. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But so now having children as an excuse to revisit, I do. But for the most part, I want to read new comics. I want to read new books. I want to watch new shows.
I always appreciate that you actually do throw out suggestions to readers of hey, here's what I'm reading right now. And it's cool because it's what? You're a comic creator and you read other comics too? And people kind of put that together. And what are you reading right now?
Oh, man. Let's see. I've got a big stack of things. So stand by. Let's see. What's on my pile. All right. Stand by. Sorry for the dead air, everyone.
All good. All good. We get to see a window into Brian's home.
I'm reading The Strange Death of Alex Raymond, which was someone on Exploding Giraffe recommended to me. This is by Cerebus creator Dave Sim and Carson Grubaugh. I guess I finished it, but it's about this cartoonist, Alex Raymond. And I've become, I guess, super interested in comic strips and old comic strips that told dramatic or Terry and the Pirates action-packed stories. And so this is a graphic novel about someone who made those and his own action-packed strange life. I haven't finished it. It's beautiful and weird so far. That's good. I've not read this at all, but this is one of those books that they say don't judge a book by its cover, but the Taurus is too great a title and too beautiful a cover. So a graphic novel by, I forgive my mispronunciation, but by Ricky Vladson. And it looked incredible. And it passed the flip through test. I'm excited to read that. And my daughter reads more graphic novels than ever. So I just bought her Truly Tyler. She has this entire, and I was curious about it. And so I want to read it for myself and see how it works. But my God, she has read more graphic novels by the age of 11 than I had read by the time I was 30. And I just realized like, oh, there's an entire golden age of graphic novels that we adults don't know about. Like if you if you haven't read Dogman, if you don't know Smile, if like these kids are obsessed with graphic novels and they're really great. And so I'm reading them to try and see what makes her tick. So
I love it.
That's what's on my nightstand at the moment.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because it's like you're in this violent, horrific world in your work day or night, right? And then your reading stuff maybe is a little bit lighter fare, which is kind of nice. So, and real quick, TV shows or films that you've been up to, and I have to say also, I'm totally destroyed that Y is not kind of moving forward at this time. The casting was phenomenal, especially 355. Like,
she's incredible.
Oh my gosh. Like it was really devastating, but what we did get to see of it was absolutely stunning. So it was cool to see the characters come to life. Yeah.
Me too. It's hard and sad, but yeah, I was crying about it to another creator friend. I was like, it only lasts this season. He's like, you had a TV show. Do you know how hard it is for things to even make it to the pilot stage, much less get made, much less have it be made by people you love? And I feel like, they really saw this book, but wanted to do something new with it. It was a real gift. So I'm grateful for it. I'm sorry it didn't go longer too, but but I love TV. I think these seasons of Barry and Atlanta in particular, I think it's just as good as it gets. I really think this season of Atlanta in particular, I just think it's had, I don't know, more to say about race. And just a hilarious, terrifying, gut-wrenching, silly, just like every episode had all of those things. And it was just a joy to watch. And it's so well directed and so well made. I think Atlanta is just one of the great shows of all time. And Barry is a show that started out being like, oh, this is fun. This is like a hitman from Cleveland who moves to the Valley. Like, this is made for me. And it's like, it's making fun of Hollywood. But this season so far, it felt like, oh wow, it's both kind of a silly, hilarious show, but that's talking about abuse in loving relationships in a sophisticated way that I haven't seen anywhere else, and it's just crazy. I can't believe Barry exists. It's really, I love that show. So a director I've got to know, Hiro Murai, has directed episodes in both of those shows. I'm like, it's so interesting to see, like, I start knowing people I love working behind the scenes. You start to see this thread of like, there's so much good work happening now. Those are two that I love at the moment.
Yeah, those are great, both great shows. And I just love him, Barry, like I can't remember the character's name, but he's, the bald guy that's the gangster. That's kind of in love with him. Yeah, he's always like, Barry, it's awesome.
He's incredible.
It's a lot of fun.
Actor.
A lot of fun. So, all right, I will absolutely let you get on with your day, but I hope it won't be another 4 years before you come back.
No, let's do this again sometime.
And what I'll do is I'll pick Ed's brain and then I'll come back with like all this inside knowledge for you and we can take you down. No, I'm just kidding.
I love it. This is beautiful. Shh, don't tell it.
We won't tell anyone. Brian, this was such an honor and I am so grateful that you spent this time with me today. And I will forever be happy now. Like this you don't understand the box that this checks for me.
That's awesome.
This is huge. So thank you so much. And I hope
thank you for your kindness week. And thanks for thoughtful questions and thanks for what you're doing. This is really awesome.
Thank you. And everybody, all the links here for all the stuff that you can read of Brian will be in this blog post as well as on the YouTube. So please get reading and get on Exploding Giraffes as well. So
awesome. Thanks, everybody.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to The Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.